The Galactic dive into this unforgettable HFY story. They had watched empires Make rise, sure you hit that like collapse, button. It really helps the channel space. If you love tales where humanity shows exactly why we're not to be underestimated into their crystalline chamber that day, turn on notifications Admiral Sarah so you never miss the next one with fleets behind her. Share this with a friend who loves a good humans our special story. She carried silence, and in that silence was a storm waiting to break. For centuries, the Council thought they understood predators. But humanity was something else. A species that had turned survival itself into an art form. When threatened, they didn't cower. They calculated. And when the Council demanded Earth's surrender, humanity didn't just answer. They rewrote the rules of galactic power in a way no alien species had ever dared imagine. The question that still haunts the galaxy is simple. What happens when you corner a species that never learned how to die quietly? The crystalline walls of the Galactic Council chamber shimmered with cold light, each facet reflecting 1,000 alien faces. For millennia, this hall had been the center of interstellar order, where decisions reshaped empires and dictated the fates of entire species. Today, however, an unease thicker than radiation hung in the air. Delegates shifted in their containment pods, tanks, or exosuits. Some clicked nervous mandibles. Others let their fronts curl tight around support rails. All of them, every representative of the 1,000 civilizations present, kept their gaze on the lone human standing at the center. Admiral Sarah Chen. She didn't fidget. She didn't bow. She stood still, her posture sharp as a blade, her uniform spotless despite traveling 47 light-years in a cramped military carrier just to stand hey. No weapons. No fleet overhead. Just one human woman surrounded by the weight of the galaxy. For a long moment, silence reigned. Even the Council's environmental systems seemed to hold their breath. Ambassador Zexathara of the hegemony shifted uncomfortably in her biopod. Her 6 eyes darted between the massive holographic display hovering above the amphitheater and the human who had not yet spoken. The hologram flickered, ready to show images at a word. And when it did, Zexathara knew. Nothing in the galaxy would ever feel safe again. Finally, the chamber's most ancient voice broke the stillness. High Councilor Vrawn. 8 millennia of authority weighed on his words as bubbles rolled through the fluid of his suspension tank. Human, his translator croaked in the common galactic tongue. Your species was warned. Expansion beyond sanctioned sectors is forbidden. You were ordered to cease. Yet you violated this most sacred decree by annexing the Proxima systems. The Council members nodded, some clicking in approval, others rippling with smug certainty. This was how the galaxy worked: reprimand, compliance, stability. It had worked for ages. But Chen didn't nod. She didn't bow. She cut across Vrawn's booming decree with a single word that cracked the chamber like a whip. Wrong. Gasps erupted. No one interrupted a High Councilor. Not ever. Yet the human voice, steady and sharp, carried through the chamber as if amplified by defiance itself. Our colonists settled in inhabited worlds, Chen said, her voice steady but edged with fury. Your forces attacked civilian transports. 17,000 of our people, including children, were vaporized without warning. The hologram flickered alive at her gesture. Scenes filled the chamber. Families rushing into evacuation shuttles. The sudden appearance of hegemony dreadnoughts blotting out stars. Flashes of antimatter torpedoes tearing ships apart. Screams frozen in the vacuum of space. Several delegates turned away. Some made sounds of discomfort. But Chen didn't look away. She let the images burn in their eyes, a wound they could never claim ignorance of again. Regrettable, another councillor finally said, their voice translated into a mechanical monotone. But necessary to maintain order. Your species is young, aggressive. You expand too fast, consume too much. The galaxy cannot. Chen laughed. It wasn't amused. It was sharp, bitter. The kind of laugh that carried the weight of grief turned into steel. You made a critical error in your calculations, she said, cutting them off without hesitation. You assumed we were just another primitive species you could bully, then break. You forgot to ask the most important question. The chamber stilled again. Even the drones that floated quietly between the tiers seemed to freeze in anticipation. Chen's eyes, dark and unflinching, scanned the amphitheater. What happens when you threaten the children of a species that conquered its own world through nothing but sustained, creative violence? Her words hit like thunder rolling through space. The hologram shifted once more, flickering into maps, star charts, dozens of systems belonging to the hegemony, each marked with tactical annotations and timestamps. Tentacles writhed in shock, eyes widened, mandibles clicked in alarm. High Counselor Vatan's voice cracked through the chamber. What is the meaning of this? Chen's answer was calm, almost too calm. While your fleets massed at our borders, while your diplomats wrote surrender terms, humanity did what we always do best. She tapped her wrist console. The hologram changed again. This time it showed wreckage, vast shipyards reduced to twisted scrap drifting in orbit, emergency beacons flashing desperately in the void. Entire fleets gone before their captains even knew they were under attack. Chen's voice carried easily across the chamber. 17 shipyards destroyed simultaneously, across a front of 300 light-years. A chorus of disbelief rippled through the chamber. Counselor Zexathar's translator stuttered. Impossible. Our intelligence networks detected no human fleet movements. Our sensors recorded your ships still guiding your home systems. Chen smiled then, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a predator who had already sprung the trap. That's because you've spent so long as apex predators, she said softly. You forgot to watch for the smaller threats. The chamber fell into chaos, voices overlapping, translators buzzing, tentacles thrashing, claws scraping metal. But no sound drowned out the truth carried in Admiral Chen's steady tone. Humanity had come not to beg for survival, but to show the galaxy something new, something terrifying. And in that crystalline chamber, for the very first time in countless millennia, the Galactic Council finally felt fear. The images hung in the chamber like ghosts. The holographic display shifted again, replaying the horror frame by frame, forcing every delegate to see what they had tried to dismiss with words like regrettable and necessary. The Proxima colonies. For decades, they had been a beacon of human hope. Worlds with open skies, seas untouched by industry, land that stretched endlessly, waiting for crops and cities. Families had left Earth not as conquerors but as settlers, teachers, farmers, children who grew up chasing winds beneath alien suns. And then, without warning, it was all gone. Admiral Chen stood unmoving as the massacre unfolded before the Council's horrified eyes. Civilian transports lifting off from orbital docks, mothers clutching their children as alarms screamed, fathers strapping themselves into seats, whispering promises of safety they couldn't possibly keep. Then, shadows. Massive warships blotting out the light, their hulls etched with the symbols of the hegemony. Play it again, Chen ordered. The hologram obeyed. Torpedoes streaked toward helpless ships, each explosion freezing in light before dissolving into clouds of nothing. 17,000 human lives, erased in moments. Some delegates turned away. Others kept staring, transfixed, as if by watching they could somehow lessen the weight of the crime. But there was no lessening it. Our people, Chen's voice cut like steel through the silence, weren't soldiers. They weren't armed. They were colonists, settlers on empty worlds, guilty only of planting crops in soil your fleets had ignored. And for that, you turned them into ash. A murmur rippled through the chamber, some species clicking in unease, others silent, ashamed. Counselor Exa, her translator giving her words a mechanical monotone, attempted to hold the line. Regrettable, she repeated, but necessary. Human expansion is dangerous. You consume too much, too quickly. The galaxy cannot permit. Necessary. Chen's voice cracked, not with weakness, but with fury contained by sheer force of will. Explain to me, Counselor, what necessity justifies vaporizing children? What logic requires the execution of families on shuttles without weapons? What kind of order rests on burning civilians alive in the cold of space? The words rang across the amphitheater, pressing against the pride of civilizations that had ruled unchecked for ages. For the first time, they felt cornered, not by fleets or firepower, but by truth. The hologram zoomed in. Faces. Ordinary faces of humans in their final moments. A young boy clutching a stuffed animal, eyes wide with terror as a flash consumed him. A woman whispering into a comb, her voice breaking as she said goodbye to someone on Earth she would never see again. A pilot steering desperately toward safety, only for antimatter fire to tear his vessel apart. One delegate sobbed, a sound alien to their species, yet unmistakably grief-stricken. Others muttered among themselves, realizing the undeniable truth. This had not been war. It had been slaughter. Chen's voice lowered, but it struck deeper than any shout. You murdered 17,000 of us. 17,000 souls extinguished in an instant. And you thought humanity would bow, that we would fold under the weight of your order. You thought wrong. Her gaze swept the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. Do you even know what 17,000 means to us? They weren't numbers. They were names, faces, lives with stories. And when you took them, you ignited something inside us that you will never be able to calculate, never be able to contain. The chamber shifted uneasily. Tentacles writhed. Mandibles clicked. One by one, species realized the truth that none of them had dared imagine. Humanity's grief was not weakness. It was fuel. Chen raised a hand. The hologram shifted once more, showing not the massacre itself, but what came after. Memorials erected across Earth, where names were etched into steel and stone. Billions of humans standing in silence, heads bowed, fists clenched. A planet united in mourning. You see this? Chen said. This is who we are. We don't forget. We don't forgive. And when you force us into a corner, we do what no other species dares. We turn sorrow into strength. We turn death into resolve. And we will never stop until justice is paid in full. A silence followed, deeper than before. The kind of silence that came not from ignorance but from the heavy realization that they had awakened something unstoppable. Then Chen asked a question no alien could answer. What happens when you kill the children of a species that survived its own endless wars, its plagues, its famines, not by chance, but by fighting tooth and nail for every sunrise? No one spoke. No one dared, because the answer was already unfolding in front of them. The council chamber pulsed with unease, the silence broken only by the faint hum of translation devices trying to catch every nuance of Admiral Chen's words. The holographic stars of the Proxima systems still glowed above, scattered with red markers of destruction. For centuries, the Galactic Council had believed in its mandate, their so-called order that limited where each species could expand, what systems could be settled, and who had the right to claim the resources of the galaxy. It was a system designed not for fairness but for control, and every species in that chamber knew it. High Counselor Vron leaned forward in his tank, his tentacles twitching with irritation. Human, he said, his voice booming through his translator. You were given boundaries. You ignored them. The Proxima annexation was in violation of Council law. You brought this upon yourselves. A murmur of agreement rose from several factions. For them, the narrative was simple. Humanity had crossed a line. But Chen did not waver. Violation, she repeated, her tone low but biting. Is that what you call it? Colonists settling uninhabited worlds. Worlds no one claimed, no one touched, no one cared about, until we made them thrive. And then you decided our success was dangerous. Her words struck deep. Several alien delegates shifted uncomfortably. They knew the truth. The Council had always kept humanity leashed. Too young, too aggressive, too resourceful. A species that had clawed its way from caves to orbit in less than 10,000 years was unpredictable, and unpredictability terrified them. Chen stepped closer to the projection, her hand passing through the glowing stars as though seizing them. You call us reckless because we expand quickly. Do you know why we expand? Because Earth taught us something no law of yours can erase. We learned that survival is never guaranteed. We learned to take every inch of soil, every drop of water, every breath of air, and fight to keep it. That instinct didn't vanish when we reached the stars. It grew. Some delegates tried to counter. A voice from the rear clicked harshly through its translator. Unchecked expansion destabilizes galactic balance. Humanity consumes resources without restraint. Your kind threatens. Chen's hand shot up, cutting them off like a blade. No. What threatens the galaxy is your hypocrisy. You speak of balance while carving entire sectors into your empires. You ration freedom like it's a privilege only the old species deserve. And when a young civilization dares to claim a patch of empty sky, you ban it. The words echoed, and for the first time, a few alien representatives did not look at Chen with disdain, but with something else, respect. Tell me, counselors, Chen continued, her voice tightening. When your species rose to power, when you colonized stars and bent lesser races under your will, did anyone stop you? Did anyone chain you to a single system and call it balance? No. You took what you could. You carved your place with fire and steel. And now you tell us we are forbidden to follow the same path. Her eyes narrowed. That isn't law. That's fey. The chamber quaked with murmurs. Some of the elder species hissed with outrage. Others whispered among themselves, realizing how fragile the Council's order truly was. Chen pressed her wrist console again. The hologram shifted, showing comparative charts of galactic expansion. The vast empires of the Council species sprawled across hundreds of light years. Humanity's territory, by comparison, was a fraction, a fragile sliver of stars. Look at this, she demanded. We are not the threat. We are the reminder. The reminder that your monopoly on power can end. That someone new can rise. And you hate us for it. High Council of Rawn's tentacles thrashed. Humanity is dangerous, he roared. Your violence is without equal. You have no restraint, no patience. No restraint. Chen's laughter was harsh, broken with bitter truth. Do you know what restraint looks like? It looks like us waiting. For decades, we followed your decrees. We watched as you claimed uninhabited systems while telling us to stay put. We swallowed your insults, your restrictions, your blockades. And still, we built. Still, we dreamed. Until the day your fleets turned our children into fire. That was your mistake. Her words carried a weight that silenced even Vron. Humanity never asked for permission to survive, Chen said softly. We never will. Expansion isn't a violation, it's our nature. And when you tried to chain that nature, when you tried to break it with slaughter, you forced us to show you exactly what it means to threaten a species that refuses to die. The chamber shifted again, tension coiling like a storm. Delegates looked at one another, some terrified, others quietly acknowledging the truth they had buried under centuries of arrogance. Humanity wasn't reckless. Humanity was inevitable. The air inside the council chamber was thick, almost oppressive. For the first time in living memory, the Galactic Council wasn't dictating terms. They were listening, and the weight of what they heard pressed down on them like the pull of a collapsing star. Admiral Chen stood unmoved at the center. Her stillness was not weakness. It was precision. Every pause, every glance, was calculated, as if she were the one presiding over judgment, not the council. You made a mistake, she said, her words sharp and deliberate. You thought humanity would break like every other young species that came before us. You thought our grief would drown us, that fear would leash us. That was your error in calculation. Her eyes flicked toward the delegation of the hegemony, whose fleets had carried out the Proxima massacre. Zexathara, their ambassador, shifted uneasily, 6 eyes darting as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. You studied our history, didn't you? Chen continued. You catalogued our wars, our conflicts, our endless bloodshed, and you saw savagery, violence. You thought it meant we were reckless, primitive, but you misunderstood. She stepped forward, the hologram behind her shifting to scenes of Earth's past. Ancient wars fought with swords and shields, gunpowder filling the air of battlefields, cities scarred by bombs, the ruins of 2 world wars, the mushroom clouds that cast shadows over the 20th century. This isn't proof of weakness, Chen said, her voice carrying the echo of every scar in humanity's past. It's proof of resilience. We fought predators on the plains. We fought empires across continents. We fought ourselves for thousands of years, and every time, we survived. That's the part you didn't calculate. You saw destruction where you should have seen determination. A ripple of unease ran through the chamber. Delegates whispered, some defensive, some shaken. Chen pressed the console on her wrist. The hologram changed again, this time showing humanity's victories not of war, but of survival. Vaccines created in the middle of plagues. Crops engineered to feed billions. Spacecraft launched from a fragile blue world into the void. A species that had faced extinction a dozen times and refused every single one. You assumed we were like you, Chen said coldly, that when faced with overwhelming power, we would submit. But humanity doesn't submit. Humanity adapts. And when survival is threatened, we find another option. Always. Her words hit the chamber like thunder. High Council of Vatan's tentacles writhed in agitation. Your kind is reckless. You risk everything. You gamble with survival itself. No, Chen answered, her voice as steady as stone. We don't gamble. We calculate. That's what you missed. You call it recklessness, but it's not. It's mathematics. Human mathematics. The phrase lingered in the air, unfamiliar and heavy with meaning. 17,000 lives were taken from us, Chen said. In your arrogance, you thought that meant we were weakened. But to us, that number became an equation. You saw finality. We saw a variable, a problem to solve. And humanity solves problems. The hologram shifted to show star maps again, each one marked with devastating precision. Shipyards destroyed. Fleets vaporized before they launched. Supply depots reduced to drifting clouds of ash. You thought we would plead, Chen said, her tone darkening. Instead, we calculated the price of vengeance, the cost of justice, and then we paid it in full. The chamber erupted in sound, shouts of disbelief, hisses of outrage, voices rising all at once. But beneath it all was something deeper. Fei. Chen raised her voice just enough to cut through the noise. Here's the truth you cannot escape. You believed humanity was fragile. That was your error in calculation. You failed to see that fragility is what forged us. You failed to see that in threatening our children, you didn't just challenge our survival. You challenged the one instinct that defines us more than any other, the refusal to die quietly. Her words silenced them all. You miscalculated, Chen finished softly. And now, the galaxy will live with the consequences. The chamber went still, every delegate forced to confront the terrifying truth. The Galactic Council had mistaken humanity's wounds for weakness. In reality, they had awakened something unstoppable. The holographic display shifted again, and this time, the chamber saw not fleets or explosions, but faces. 17,000 faces. Young, old, men, women, soldiers, farmers, engineers. Humans who had stood in the long shadow of grief and chosen not despair, but sacrifice. Chen's voice softened, but it carried more weight than any roar. Each of them knew what they were walking into. They weren't drafted. They weren't coerced. They volunteered. Because when you slaughtered Proxima, you didn't just kill people. You ignited a fire in the hearts of billions. And 17,000 stepped forward to carry that fire into the dark. The hologram zoomed in on one face, a pilot, barely older than 20, smiling in a pre-recorded message. If this buys Earth another sunrise, then it's worth it. Another appeared, a mother of two, whispering goodbye to her children, her voice steady. I'll see you again in the stars. One by one, the messages played. Simple words, not grand speeches, not propaganda. Truth. They weren't chosen for their strength, Chen continued. They were chosen because they were willing. They boarded stealth craft barely large enough for a cockpit and a warhead. No weapons. No defenses. Only speed, stealth, and resolve. The hologram shifted to show the ships themselves, tiny compared to Council dreadnoughts, their hulls bending light around them, slipping unseen past sensor nets that had never been designed to detect something so small, so relentless. They left Earth with enough supplies for 3 days. That was all they needed. They knew their destination was also their grave. And yet, Chen's voice sharpened. They smiled when they launched. A delegate hissed, their translator spitting out disbelief. 17,000 suicide attacks. That's not strategy. That's barbarism. Chen's eyes snapped toward them. Barbarism. No. Strategy. You assume strategy is only about fleets, logistics, and numbers. But you don't understand humans. Strategy for us begins with willpower. And our willpower is infinite when our children are threatened. The hologram flickered to star maps once more. Dots began to pulse. Council shipyards, fleet stations, supply depots. Each one lit with a timestamp. 71 hours after launch, Chen said. 17,000 human craft arrived at your most vital systems. One by one, they completed their missions. They didn't need to fight your fleets. They didn't need to win battles. They only needed to reach their targets. And they did. The chamber watched as entire shipyards erupted in fire. Fleets docked for resupply vanished into debris clouds before their captains even sounded alarms. Supply lines that had fed wars for centuries disintegrated in chain reactions of antimatter. Chen didn't look away. She let them watch. She let them see. 17,000 human lives, she said. Traded for millions of yours. Traded for 60% of your military infrastructure. A ratio you never imagined possible, because you never understood the human equation. Ambassador Zexathara of the hegemony trembled in her pod. This is madness. Unsustainable. No species could. No species but us. Chen cut in. Her voice was not loud, but it froze the chamber. You've lived so long as apex predators. You forgot that survival sometimes means bleeding for every inch. You forgot that sometimes victory doesn't belong to the strongest, but to the most relentless. The hologram faded, leaving only the silence of the chamber, thick with realization. They died knowing their names would never be sung in your halls, Chen continued. They died without the promise of remembrance, except from us. But in death, they taught the galaxy a lesson. A simple one: never corner a species that has mastered the art of sacrifice. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the chamber. They were not martyrs. They were not saints. They were human. And that is enough. The chamber, once filled with arrogance and condescension, now trembled with unease. For the first time in centuries, the Council's mighty empires understood vulnerability, not because their fleets were shattered, but because they had glimpsed a truth too vast to ignore. 17,000 had walked willingly into darkness, and the galaxy would never sleep soundly again. The holographic stars above the chamber burned red with destruction. To the delegates of the Galactic Council, each glowing marker was more than a symbol. It was a wound, a scar carved into the very heart of their power. Admiral Chen stood with arms folded behind her back, her presence calm but unyielding. You thought your fleets were untouchable, she said, her voice carrying across the crystalline walls. You believed your shipyards were invincible. You believed supply lines fed by centuries of dominance could never be severed. And now you see what 17,000 of us have done. The images rotated through the chamber. The Keith Moru Naval Yard, once the pride of the hegemony, now a field of twisted metal and burning wreckage. Entire flotillas caught in harbor, their crews never knowing what hit them. Supply depots reduced to expanding clouds of plasma, emergency signals screaming into the void with no answer. Delegates leaned forward, their mandibles clicking, tentacles writhing, fronts twitching. For the first time in their history, they weren't watching someone else's fall. They were watching their own. Counselor Zexathara's translator crackled, her once steady tone now trembling. Our intelligence networks, they detected no fleet movements from Earth. No mass mobilization. How did your people strike across 300 light-years in one blow? Chen didn't smile. Not fully. But her expression carried the weight of a predator's patience. Because you never thought to look for the smaller threats. You counted our dreadnoughts. You tracked our cruisers. You measured tonnage and firepower. But you never measured resolve. That was your blind spot. A murmur spread through the amphitheater. Some whispered accusations, others excuses. But none could ignore the evidence before them. The greatest fleets of the galaxy, shattered without a battle. Chen pressed her console again. More images fled to life. Planets whose orbits glittered with debris. Emergency beacons flashing desperately into the void. Entire command structures disintegrated. Fleets that had once stood as symbols of dominance, now little more than wreckage drifting silent through cold space. You measure strength by scale, Chen said. We measure it by outcome. You had millions of soldiers, thousands of ships, centuries of strategy. But against 17,000 humans, you've lost your fleets, your shipyards, your war machine. High Council of Ron's translator voice rumbled with outrage. This cannot stand. You've doomed your species to annihilation. The Council's combined fleets will gather, and Earth will burn. Chen turned to him, her eyes dark and steady. Which fleets? The ones drifting in debris? The ones stranded without supply lines? Or the ones too busy clawing through rubble to find survivors? Tell me, High Counselor, what ships will you use to glass Earth now? The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, translators scrambling to keep pace with the chaos. Some shouted in fear, others in fury. But beneath it all, one truth was undeniable. The fleets that had guaranteed their dominance for centuries were gone. Chen let the storm rage for a moment, then spoke over it. We didn't destroy your fleets out of vengeance alone. We destroyed them because you left us no choice. You thought you could erase us with fire. Instead, you forced us to show you exactly what it means when humanity fights for survival. The images shifted one final time, before and after shots of galactic maps. What once glowed with the strength of the Council's militaries now stood hollowed, broken. Chen's voice cut like ice. 17,000 of ours for 4 million of yours. You tell me, who made the better calculation? The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. For the first time in its long history, the Galactic Council stared into the abyss of its own weakness. The fleets that had once enforced their decrees lay in ruins. The balance of power was broken, and at the center of it all stood one human, unarmed, reminding them of a truth they had never dared consider. The galaxy's predators had just been hunted. The council chamber was no longer a place of order. It had dissolved into chaos. Tentacles thrashed, claws scraped metal, translucent fronts quivered in agitation. Translators buzzed frantically, overlapping voices in a storm of confusion and fear. The delegates of the Galactic Council, the same beings who had once ruled the galaxy with absolute authority, now scrambled like frightened prey. One species ambassador tried to patch through to their homeworld, frantically hissing into a private channel. Another delegate fumbled with controls, the translator breaking as they shouted orders to military commanders who were no longer answering. The crystal walls of the chamber reflected their panic, amplifying the sense of collapse. Admiral Sarah Chen didn't move. She simply watched. Her stillness made the frenzy around her seem louder, sharper. The one human in the room was calm while 1,000 alien civilizations trembled. "This is impossible," a voice crackled through a translator, choked with disbelief. "Entire fleets cannot vanish in hours. Shipyards cannot fall without warning. Our defenses. Your defenses never mattered," Chen interrupted coldly. Her voice cut across the chaos like a blade. "You spent millennia believing scale meant invincibility. You forgot that wars aren't won by who has the most ships. They are won by who has the most to lose, and the will to protect it." The words slammed into the chamber harder than any explosion. Ambassador Zexathara of the hegemony slumped in her biopod, her 6 eyes wide, her translator stuttering. "We underestimated you," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Chen's gaze turned on her. "Yes, you did. And now you've seen the cost of your arrogance." The chamber erupted again, but this time it wasn't outrage. It was fear. Delegates turned on each other, voices sharp and panicked. Species that had once stood united in dominance now whispered accusations, each trying to shift blame, each trying to find a way out. "They'll come for us next," one delegate muttered, their fronts curling tight around their containment chair. "No fleet left to defend our colonies," another cried. "They're humans, they'll slaughter us all," a third hissed. Chen raised a hand, and against all odds, the noise began to dim. Not because she demanded silence, but because they needed to hear her. Fear made them listen. 17,000 of ours died at Proxima," she said evenly. "We answered by tearing down 60% of your military strength. That is not the end. That is the beginning. And if you think panic will save you, you are mistaken." The chamber quieted, her words pulling the delegates back from the brink of hysteria. "You thought yourselves untouchable," Chen continued. "Now you've seen how fragile you really are. You believed the Council could dictate the galaxy with fleets and decrees. But today you learned a truth you cannot escape. Your power was never invincible. It was borrowed. And humanity just collected the debt." Some delegates stared at her with open terror, others with awe. For centuries, they had treated humans as a species to be managed, contained, controlled. Now they looked at Chen and saw something they couldn't unsee. A predator they hadn't known existed until it was too late. "You wanted submission," Chen said, her tone almost quiet, almost intimate. "What you got instead was revelation." Her eyes swept the chamber, locking on every pair of alien eyes, senses, or tendrils that dared meet her gaze. "You wanted to teach us, Faye. Instead, you've learned it yourselves. And make no mistake, you will never forget this lesson." For a long, trembling moment, no one spoke. The Galactic Council, the great machine that had dictated the galaxy's future for 8 millennia, was no longer united. It was panicking, fracturing, falling apart under the weight of one species' retaliation. And through it all, the lone human in the chamber stood unmoving, reminding them with her very presence that the galaxy's balance had shifted forever. The panic in the chamber still hummed like static in the air, but Admiral Chen stood unshaken, her hands clasped neatly behind her back. She waited until the last whispers died down, until every eye, lens, or sensor turned back toward her. And then she spoke the words that froze them all over again. "You still don't understand," Chen said softly. "What you've seen here today, this isn't humanity at its peak. It isn't even half of what we can do. This," she gestured at the holograms filled with wreckage, destruction, and fire, "was just our opening move." The council chamber went silent. Not just quiet, silent. Even the hum of translation devices seemed to dim, as though the machines themselves dared not intrude. Chen let that silence grow heavy before she continued. "You killed 17,000 of ours at Proxima," she said. "We answered with 17,000 of our own, each one willing to trade their life for your fleets, your shipyards, your strength. And in doing so, they proved a truth you never calculated. Humanity's population is not just a number. It's potential. 8 billion potential volunteers. 8 billion possible one-way missions. 8 billion reasons you should think very carefully about your next step." The hologram shifted again, showing Earth, not as the fragile blue world they once mocked, but as a globe teeming with people, cities lit like constellations, industry humming with energy. 8 billion lives, each represented as a flickering point of light. "Do the math," Chen said. "If 17,000 destroyed 60% of your military strength, what happens when even a fraction of Earth's population decides to fight the same way?" Some delegates visibly recoiled. Others shuddered, fronts curling, mandibles clacking nervously. A few dared to whisper, their translators breaking under the strain. It would be extinction. Chen's gaze hardened. "Yes, yours, not ours." For a long moment, no one breathed. The council, which had always seen itself as eternal, was staring into the abyss of its own end, and realizing that abyss was shaped like humanity. High Counselor Vron tried to recover, his tentacles trembling in his suspension tank. "Even if this is true," he rasped, "you cannot sustain such madness. You would bang yourselves out." Chen cut him off with ice in her tone. "You're wrong again. You think in terms of fleets and empires. We think in terms of survival. And survival is the most sustainable thing humanity has ever mastered. We survived plagues that killed millions, wars that spanned continents, disasters that should have ended us. But we endured. Always. And now, with the stars at our backs, we endure more fiercely than ever." The hologram zoomed out, star maps shifting until the entire galactic sector lay before them. Entire swaths of territory once marked in council colors now glowed with empty red scars where fleets and supply lines had been obliterated. "This," Chen said, her voice low but sharp, "is the proof that we are not prey. We are not children to be scolded. We are a force you cannot contain, cannot predict, and cannot erase. And every move you make against us will only teach us how to hit harder." A ripple of fear washed through the chamber. Delegates activated comms, whispering frantic instructions to their governments. Others simply sat frozen, unable to comprehend the sheer scale of what humanity had promised. But Chen wasn't done. "You thought you were delivering an ultimatum," she said. "In reality, you delivered us a challenge. And humanity doesn't shrink from challenges. We rise to meet them. That is our nature." Her words struck like thunder, final and undeniable. 17,000 humans had already shown the galaxy what sacrifice could achieve. 8 billion more waited, ready to rise if pushed. And every alien in that chamber knew the terrifying truth. The Council wasn't staring at the end of humanity. They were staring at the beginning. The Council chamber had seen countless votes. Empires rising, laws drafted, species judged. But in its 8 millennia of history, it had never witnessed silence this absolute. Not even the faint hum of drones. Not the whisper of translators. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes when predators realize they have met something far more dangerous than themselves. Admiral Sarah Chen let the weight of it settle before she spoke. "You came to Earth with threats," she said. "You gave us 72 hours to surrender. You promised to glass our world. You promised extinction." Her gaze swept the chamber, steady and unflinching. "And in your arrogance, you believed those words were power. But you were wrong. The true power was our answer." The hologram above shifted one final time. Not to destruction, not to fleets, not to fire, but to faces. Billions of faces. Humanity's strength laid bare, not in weapons, but in people. Farmers, scientists, engineers, children laughing under alien suns. An ocean of lives united by one truth. Survival at any cost. "You asked us to do the math," Chen continued. "And we did. We showed you that when you kill 17,000 of ours, we don't break, we multiply. We showed you that sacrifice is not defeat, it is our weapon. And we showed you that if you ever threaten our children again, you will face not a fleet, not a nation, but an entire species ready to trade everything to ensure you fall first." The chamber shuddered with the weight of her words. High Counselor Vron trembled in his suspension tank, his ancient voice breaking as it emerged through the translator. This is insanity. You would risk your species to prove a point." Chen's eyes narrowed, and her reply came sharp as a blade. "No, we risked 17,000 to prove a lesson. And that lesson is this: never threaten humanity. Not because we are stronger, not because we are wiser, but because we are relentless. And there is no calculation, no fleet, no decree that can outlast that truth." For a long, trembling moment, no one dared speak. Then, one by one, the delegates' gazes lowered. Even the proudest predators in the chamber understood. The balance of the galaxy had shifted. Permanently. Finally, the ancient voice of Vron croaked again, weaker this time. What do you want?" Chen let the question hang, then answered with the cold precision of inevitability. "Recognition. Every human colony is sovereign. Every human settlement is legitimate. And humanity will take its place among you, not as subjects, not as prey, but as equals." Silence stretched again. Then, slowly, inevitably, the vote was cast. For the first time in its history, the Galactic Council voted unanimously. Humanity was no longer a petitioner. Humanity was a power. The hologram dimmed. Delegates whispered among themselves, shaken to their course. Some would return to their worlds in anger, others in faith. But all would return with the same truth carved into their memory. Earth was not to be threatened. Chen turned, her uniform gleaming beneath the crystalline lights. She walked from the chamber without looking back, her steps measured, steady. She had not come to beg. She had not come to compromise. She had come to teach. And the lesson would echo across the stars for generations. Never threaten a species that has spent its entire history finding creative ways to kill things bigger, stronger, and better armed than themselves. Never threaten humanity,